Hello, and a warm welcome to this brand new Sustainability Education podcast. I'm Dr. Stefan Siegel, postdoc researcher at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. In sustainability education, ideas and assumptions exist that sound plausible, but that are at least questionable or even dangerous at a closer look. In this podcast, I want to discuss myths and facts about sustainability education and the things in between. For this purpose, I invite world-leading experts on environmental and sustainability education, educational psychology, and myth and misinformation research. This podcast series is part of the research project Identifying, Understanding, and Challenging Myths in and about Sustainability Education. My vision is a more evidence-informed, effective, and ethically responsible sustainability education, and I hope to push the boundaries of knowledge in this field. I would be most delighted if you listened in and joined our conversation. You can do so on all the usual podcast platforms. Enjoy listening. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Gale Sinatra on today's episode of the Sustainability Education podcast. Gale is a distinguished professor of psychology from the University of Southern California. She holds currently the Stephen H. Crocker Chair at the UC School of Education and is also Associate Dean for Research. She has received more than 20 awards and grants and was ranked, among others, in the top 20 of women educational psychologists regarding publishing productivity. Gale has written over 200 articles, book chapters, and professional publications. Her areas of expertise include, among others, climate science of education, conceptual change, and the public understanding of science. As misinformation has been identified as a top global risk by the World Economic Forum in 2024, understanding the psychological underpinnings of science denial and educational and psychological myths have never been more important. Welcome, Gale. Where are you joining us from today?
Well, thank you very much, Stefan, for having me join you today. I am in Altadena, California, just north of Los Angeles.
Thanks for being here. Let's start without further ado with the first question, and they are about terminology. Misinformation, misconceptions, questionable or false beliefs, do they basically all mean the same, or how would you differentiate between those terms? Could you provide us with some clarity, please?
Well, I don't know how much clarity I can provide because the field is really a little bit messy on terminology, but misinformation is different from disinformation. So let's start there. Misinformation is any inaccurate information that is shared knowingly or unwittingly. And it's probably something we've all done. Unfortunately, online, we see something we think is credible and we maybe don't check it out too much and we share it. So misinformation is in that category. Disinformation is misinformation that is shared by people wittingly. In other words, they know it is inaccurate and they're sharing it anyway. And this is done for either political or economic, financial, or nefarious other reasons. So the term sort of propaganda may in fact fit under this terminology. Malinformation is disinformation that has spread knowingly and wittingly to hurt an individual. So maybe someone is up for an award in an academic organization and you say something that's about them that it could hurt their chances of getting the award and you know it's not true. So that it's sort of a directed aim at an individual. So then you mentioned the term misconceptions. So that term is those three terms I just talked about, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. There's more agreement in the field, I believe, about those terms. I think misconceptions has more of a controversial definition. It depends on your stance. In my research, I would say misconceptions are wrongly held beliefs about science. And it's a lot easier, I think, to determine what those are. So an example would be flat Earth. Dinosaurs and humans walked at the same time on the Earth. Those are misconceptions, and it's easier to use that term in science for many things people misconceive because there's ostensibly a correct answer. I think in politics and social studies and opinion oriented, it's much harder to apply the word misconception
Hmm.
to that information because there may or may not be an exact correct or incorrect answer. Now, that also can be true in science. I think a good current debate in science is the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's quite a debate going on, and whether it was from the wet markets or from the lab leak, and many people will say that's been resolved. I don't know if it's been resolved or not, but I would not add that into the character of misconception if you believe one way or the other, because I don't think that's 100. That's not like the shape of the earth, right? It's still controversial enough. It's still possible that we're going to find out alternative information that would change people's thinking there. So if you held one or the other of those beliefs, I'm not sure that I personally would call it a quote science misconception, because I think the jury may be out on some of that information. I know what most people think, but I think when you get to the edges of science, then I don't necessarily think using the word misconception is necessarily as accurate.
Would you then use another word like questionable belief, for instance? And how would the term myth fit into that?
Well, put the lab link aside for a minute. I think myth is a whole different thing as well. So, I think that when people say something like myth, I think they're referring to something else. I think that's a broadly held belief among a number of people that is unsubstantiated. So I don't use myth in my own research. I would definitely use misconception when it comes down to science ideas. I think ideas on the edge of our understanding, I would just say that we can't be certain, and if we're not yet certain of that information, then I would definitely not call it a myth or a misconception. I would say it's perhaps just on the edges of our understanding and yet to be confirmed. And one more term to throw in would be skepticism. So skepticism is a good and healthy part of science, right? We want to be skeptical. If we see one study come out with a small number of participants that says chocolate is good for you for breakfast, then you might be skeptical because it's not been randomized controlled trial, it's not been broadly studied, it's not been replicated. So skepticism is healthy when employed appropriately. It gets to be a problem when skepticism goes awry, and then particularly today in the age of the internet and so much misinformation, skepticism can lead to questioning everything, and then that becomes a problem.
I would fully agree. Regarding the myth term or your reservations regarding the myth term, I can understand that because it's quite an absolute word. Would you use, for instance, the term misunderstanding more?
Yes, certainly. I would say misunderstanding is somewhat like a misconception, and sure, I think I would definitely use that term as well.
In your works about educational myths, or you often use the term zombie concept, but we'll come back later to that. Educational myths and sustainability education could be currently considered hot topics. What comes to mind when you hear the terms myths or misunderstandings in and about sustainability education?
So there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation, misunderstandings, and maybe myths about sustainability. So first of all, I think the term is very broad, and so people don't understand what it means. And it's okay, because there isn't a clear and definitive, universally agreed upon definition of what sustainability means. So a lot of people think sustainability, has to do with the kind of nuts and bolts of the infrastructure of, say, a company or a university. So do we recycle? Do
Yeah.
we conserve water? Do we put in low flow water faucets? And, so those things do have to do with sustainability for sure, but sustainability is much broader than that. So you can think of sustainability research, obviously. You can think of sustainability education, and you can think of sustainability in many other kinds, like sustainability communication. I mean, so there's many
Mm.
different other areas besides just the nuts and bolts of tightening up our use of resources in the physical infrastructure in which we live, work, and play. Those things are all sustainability issues for sure. But sustainability is often used to be more broad and to include education, research, communication, and these other areas.
So it's more than just the ecology or more than green or earth-related topics.
Yes, and I think another big misconception is that sustainability has to do with the earth
It has,
alone.
of course, but
Of course, it has to do with the earth, but I think what people really are interested in, who are interested in sustainability, is the human and the nature interaction. So it isn't about saving the planet, because to be honest, the planet will be fine. One way
I,
or
su-
another, the planet will be fine. The
I
planet is
suppose
not a
so, yeah. Whether humanity will be fine, we don't know yet.
right. So when
Yeah,
people are talking about sustainability, I think the misconception is often, oh, people who care about the earth over humans. And that is a huge misconception. The reason people
absolutely.
interested in sustainability are interested in sustainability mostly is to preserve human. I think that gets left out a lot. It's not about saving the trees, it's about saving all of us and saving our ability to grow
Mm.
crops and eat food and saving wildlife, because again, it's not about the polar bears, it's about biodiversity. And if we lose too many different species, it actually threatens our food sources. So it's really about sustaining flora and fauna and us for
Mm.
future generations. And I think people don't really appreciate how much it is about us, not just about the trees.
So you would need a systems thinking perspective there to get this whole web that we are embedded to. I fully agree. I think that's a very relevant point you mentioned there. As in other domains, many myths and questionable assumptions exist in education. Numerous education and psychological myths have been well documented in compilations by De Bruyckere et al. Or Lilienfeld and colleagues. When you think of your decades of experience in research and practice in educational psychology, what are some of the most pervasive myths that you have encountered so far?
Well, I think there is a strong resistance to science
Mm.
information. And I think the reason why, and we talk about this in our book, and other scholars have talked about it, is a lot of science information is definitely not intuitive. It's not intuitive that the Earth is round. That's not intuitive. So there's many aspects of the scientific world that are not intuitive, and they are not easy to understand. You can't see the coronavirus with
Mm.
your naked eye. So, because it's very hard for people to observe many of the fundamental aspects of science with their own eyes,
Mm.
it's always been a challenge for humans to understand science. It's just not easy. It's not easy, and it's not intuitive, and it's not always available to direct observation. So those kinds of issues have been pervasive. So we know in astronomy, shape of the earth, we know
Mm.
in biology, human and animal evolution. So recently we're seeing all the misconceptions about immunology, and especially coming up more with the coronavirus and vaccines. So those are some of the ones that we're seeing consistently across time. And then of course recently, even people questioning germ theory, which is something that I think you could say is pervasive in that it wasn't well understood until the microscope was invented, right? Because you couldn't really understand that. So I think that's one of the things that's really important to realize is science is not intuitive, and a lot of the basic core tenets of different disciplines aren't obvious. And so they are the ones that are ripe for persistent misconceptions.
I see. Education is not immune to myths either, and so isn't environmental and sustainability education. In your view, which educational or psychological misconceptions or misunderstandings are also or especially relevant in environmental or sustainability education?
I would say some of the things we've already mentioned, that it's all about the earth. I think with climate change that, you see that it's all about the future as opposed to right now. The climate is currently undergoing change right now, and it is exacerbating extreme weather, for example. So, I think the idea that climate change is something that's going to happen in the future, I think that's something that, that isn't happening now. Those are myths that certainly we are dealing with. Another really big one is being debated right now quite a bit is doomerism. There's a lot of particularly young progressive people concerned about climate who are saying we're doomed. And there's a couple of reasons why that's not great. One is many scientists don't think that's true. Everyone in climate sciences realize things are bad and getting worse, but that doesn't mean all humanity is doomed. And I would say there's a lot of research evidence, a big study that just recently came out, and many others showing that when people feel they're doomed, they're less motivated to take action. So spreading doomerism is very negative because it demotivates people to take action. And of course, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if we all decide it's not worth taking any action and we all give up on taking any action, then of course we would ironically be doomed. So
Absolutely.
doomerism is not helpful, and yet people are really perpetuating that myth about sustainability and sustainability education. So I think what we need to do is to be clearer about what is realistic and what is not, and to be, of course, honest and realistic, and not to be minimizing what's going on and where we're headed. But there are many things you can do. I think another big source of myths and mythology and sustainability and environmental education is the debate between individual action and systemic action. So there's a lot of people that say individual actions don't matter. Whether you recycle or drive an electric car or have solar panels on your house doesn't matter because it makes so little difference. I disagree with that because I think there's research to show that when you do those things first, you feel a little bit better and you can keep carrying on and continuing to take progressive actions towards mitigating the worst of climate change. But also there's research to show that it sets an example and shifts what we perceive as normal. I've had an all-electric vehicle for 10 years, and when I first got my first all-electric vehicle, they were pretty rare. But as more and more people got them, now they're very, very common, especially here in Southern California. So as you change what's normal by your own behavior, another example, solar panels. When we put solar panels on our house, people are like, what's that? But now it's becoming more and more common. So if you take individual actions, you feel better about yourself, and you can set an example that shifts the norm. Of course, systemic change is definitely more impactful and more important, and that involves voting and holding public and corporate entities to account. So that, of course, is more impactful, but I think it's wrong to dismiss the impact of individual actions. So that's another big area of myth in environmental and sustainability education.
I'd like to ask you a personal question, if I may. Truth be told, if you think back to the beginning of your own professional biography, what misconception or misunderstandings did you hold about education, or maybe even sustainability education? And what did you most help overcome this misconception?
Oh, Wow, that is such a hard question to reflect back on. So I would say that when I started out, I was not even engaged in sustainability
Hmm.
education. So that's new. And I would say when I started in conceptual change
Hmm.
about science, that I definitely was naive to the extent of the resistance. So, our
Hmm.
book on science denial talks about doubt, denial, and resistance to
Yeah.
science. And I think when I began the work, probably more than 15 years ago, on that, I don't think I even understood the extent of the resistance and
Hmm.
how deep and broad it was. And when we talk in the book about all the different ways people doubt, deny, and resist, those areas are things that took me years of research, I think, to fully appreciate.
I think we come back to that exactly now. In your text with Jacobson, you speak about zombie concepts in education. And I wonder, could you elaborate a little bit on why are zombie concepts so appealing? You state that they offer compelling, intuitively appealing, comprehensible explanations. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think the most prolific zombie concept in education is learning styles. The
Yeah.
notion that individuals all have their own unique learning style, or that there's a set of 4 or 5 specific learning styles and people learn best in that way, is very intuitive, right? Because we all want to believe we're special and we all want a simple explanation for learning challenges. Why doesn't every child learn to read easily when presented with high quality instruction? That's perplexing, so we want a nice, easy explanation. Oh, they're not a
Mhm.
visual learner. That's what it is. So I think it's compelling and easy to accept these myths, and then they're perpetuated because, to be honest, they're taught often
Absolutely. Yeah.
in schools of education, and faculty have to really resist that, and so they get perpetuated in that way. So they're very hard. We call them zombie concepts because they don't die on their own and they're very hard to kill.
Yeah. I wonder also what cultural or societal factors contribute to the formation of these myths. So, what are reasons they occur, and what are sources for these myths or of these myths?
Well, I think they come from different things. I think, you could take, vaccines cause
Hmm.
autism, which is a persistent myth, not in education per se, but a persistent
Yeah.
myth. And that came from a fraudulent study that was published. So these myths can emerge from nefarious places like that. They can also just emerge from bad research that
Mm.
isn't nefarious. I think that's the issue with learning styles. It's
Hmm.
just sort of I would call it a pop, idea that just took off
That's nice.
because of the reasons we mentioned. It's compelling, it's an easy
Mm.
explanation, it explains a very complex phenomena. I think in all of these cases, what happens that allows them to persist is that we don't have the actual answers.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if we had complete clarity on what causes autism, I think the vaccine mythology would go away. But it's because we
Mm.
don't fully understand the root causes. I think we're getting much more clarity on
Mm.
that recently. But if the root cause of something is not well understood, that opens up the possibility of these myths, and then they stick around because we still don't have the causal explanation. That's where I think they come into play and are hard to get rid of.
Based on the works of Frankfurt, Philipp Hübel, a German philosopher, states that misinformation or myths are spread by liars, bullshitters, and or morons. When I think about myths in and about sustainability education or education in general, these terms sound very harsh to me, very derogatory and inflammatory. Why would or wouldn't you use these terms?
It's incorrect. It's incorrect and
Mhm.
inaccurate. I
Yeah.
know for a fact that I've shared an article online, which I later found out to be incorrect. So we can all of us, people who are very smart, very thoughtful, and people who study this for a living, can mistakenly share a piece of incorrect information. So I think it's really short-sighted to pin misinformation all on, people being not very smart, because it just doesn't hold up. The evidence does not suggest that. I think there is some suggestion that those people who are who are more likely to fall for conspiracy theories have been shown to be somewhat less open-minded, somewhat less engaged in critical thinking. So there's something to that. But the idea that it's only stupid people who share misinformation, it's just not correct. It's objectively not true.
But what would you say, which factors contribute to the susceptibility to educational or myths in general?
Well, I would say everyone is susceptible to them. That's what our book is all about. There is not a type of person or a personality who doubts, denies, or resists science. That is not what we find in the research. What we find is each of us is potentially susceptible, either through our emotions, or through our identity, or through motivated reasoning. So we go through in each chapter of the book all the different ways individuals can be susceptible to doubt, denial, and resistance. And there isn't one type of person, there isn't one political party that has a corner on falling for misinformation and spreading it. In fact, we see people on the left spreading misinformation about vaccines, about health-related issues. We see people on the right spreading misinformation about coronavirus and about the election. So it really depends. It's not there's a type of person that falls for and shares misinformation. That is not true. We all are susceptible to it. And if the circumstances are right, you or I might fall to it. So you have to look at each of those different factors we look at in the book: identity, motivations, conceptual knowledge, all the different factors that would lead someone to fall prey to misinformation.
I think this is a very important finding, because it also has then something to do with some sort of humility or intellectual humility. But I read an article recently by Ecker and al., who spoke of cognitive and affective or emotional drivers of false beliefs. Your answer reminded me of that. In a text in 2004, you write, "A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. What do you think are the potential consequences of myths in and about sustainability educations, on educators, on students, and the broader society?"
Yeah, so what we mean by a little knowledge is a dangerous thing is that sometimes we can know a little bit, but not enough to correctly think and reason about a scientific topic. And so that's where you can run awry, is if you think you know more than you actually do. So if you just have a little bit of knowledge about a scientific topic, you're probably susceptible to believing misinformation more so. The more you know about a topic, the more you realize what we don't know. And that makes you more open to alternatives, more open to nuance. So that's why we say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And then there was a second part of your question.
What do you think are the potential consequences of myths in and about sustainability education?
Well, obviously, if we don't get a better understanding about what sustainability is, we aren't going to be able to successfully address the climate crisis. We aren't going to be able to successfully address plastic pollution, and we're not going to be able to successfully address the major crises that are coming our way in terms of food and water availability to persist. So we need to address better understanding of what the real issues are and what really can be done, so that current and future generations can be more effective in continuing to persist on our planet.
Could you discuss or re-mention a particular myth in sustainability education that you find especially misleading or harmful to the goals of achieving such a sustainable world or society?
Let's see, there's a bunch. I would say the one we already mentioned is that sustainability is just about the earth, not about us. It's about us on the earth and in interaction with all living things on the earth. I think another one is that's very persistent is, sustainability is too expensive. It's too expensive to address the climate crisis. It's too expensive. It is wildly expensive, but look at the expense that comes from an entire town in California called Paradise that was burnt to the ground. Look at the expense of that. So look at the expense of having to relocate people from coastal communities as sea level rise happens. So it is true that adapting and mitigating climate change is wildly expensive. There's no question about that. But you really have to look at what is the cost of not doing any of those things. When you have billions of dollars spent annually on multiple extreme weather disasters, and those are going to increase, and we're going to continue to have to spend more and more and more, it isn't the case that it's affordable to not address climate change. It's very expensive to not address climate change.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the big myths that we really need to talk about.
In my habilitation or my postdoctoral project, I'm striving to develop a sustainability education mythology. And Lilienfeld and colleagues coined the term psychomythology to represent this vast body of misconceptions, urban legends, and old wives' tales regarding to psychology. I would like to create such a wiki or a taxonomy of myths in and about sustainability and their refutations. With view to your years of experience and research in educational psychology, as well as in climate science denial, which myths should be definitely included in your opinion? You already mentioned quite a few. Maybe jump to the next question. Do you think that there are foundation myths or misconceptions that other myths are built upon?
Yeah, I think some of the ones that we've talked about cost, it's about the planet, not about us, about humans can't impact the climate. That's one we haven't really talked about. That's a good one. Humans can't impact the climate. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course we do. But that myth is persistent and also used to resist making any changes. So that's another one I would add. I love the idea of a wiki. That's great. And I love the idea of using refutations. We are just about to publish a very large scale meta-analysis on refuting science misconceptions and using refutation texts. So the structure of a refutation text is you state the misinformation, you refute it directly, and then you explain, and this part's really important, you explain why the correct science is correct. And using that three-part structure, we have found, and we just got this paper accepted with minor revisions. We're making those minor revisions.
Very cool.
Be out soon in a large-scale meta-analysis that refutational approach is effective. And I'd also refer you to the debunking handbook, which has other strategies that are also effective. So there's a number of strategies out there for myth busting or misconception addressing that are effective. So I think some of the major ones we talked about combined on your wiki with some of these strategies, I would definitely say that would be a powerful way to go.
I'm looking forward to that article. And of course, I know the debunking handbook, which is a very valuable resource in my opinion. Also in the text with Jacobson, you say that educational myths can gain strength from and are reified by their relation to other zombie concepts. Often zombie concepts group together and they travel in herds, increasing their danger, even allowing for new and emergent zombie concepts. How can and should myths be structured in such mythology about sustainability education? Would you use objects, areas, domains, or how would you structure that?
Well, what you see from the conspiracy ideation literature is that people who are susceptible to conspiracy ideation do tend to believe more than one. So it's very rare, actually, to find someone who believes one and only one conspiracy. So once you sort of break down your trust in expertise, you no longer trust expertise, you are overly skeptical or distrustful of the scientific enterprise, you don't understand how science works, or you mistrust how science works, you conflate science with big pharma or some other big industry that may or may not have our best interest at heart, and you say that's what science is. So once you do all those things, then you begin to sort of break down the fundamentals of understanding science and supporting science. And once you've done that, then the probability that you're going to believe multiple misconceptions, because you no longer have trust and expertise, increases. So it's not just about the concept itself, the breakdown of trust in authority, the breakdown in trust in expertise, the suspicion and paranoia about nefarious actors.
Yep.
And again, the problem is some of these things are true, right? There always are some nefarious actors. There always is someone trying to sell you something. There always is a political agenda. So when people put all that together and it erodes their trust, then they're not going to trust anything having to do with science.
So independent from the topic, from the thematic area.
Right. So at this point, it doesn't have anything to do with the topic at all. It has to do with the fact that you don't trust authority, you don't trust expertise, you don't trust the scientific enterprise, you don't trust the government, you don't trust the CDC, you don't trust, once all that breaks down, then you can at that point have multiple misconceptions that group together and are hard to overcome. Another persistent myth is that anything we do for sustainability is a sacrifice. And I think that myth is huge, right? So it's a sacrifice. I can't eat meat. It's a sacrifice. I can't drive a gas-powered big truck. It's a sacrifice. I have to go live in a yurt off the grid. No, there's a lot of things in sustainability that are great, like, and improve the quality of your life. Like if you eat less meat, you might be healthier, or you might lose weight. If you've had the opportunity to drive an electric car, they are really fun to drive. They're really fun to drive. I love my electric vehicle. It's not unaffordable. I have a very affordable electric vehicle. I don't drive a Tesla. I have a nice Nissan Leaf that costs less than $300 a month to maintain because there's no maintenance. It's the framing that everything about sustainability is sacrifice is a really bad frame, because A, it's not true, and B, nobody wants to come join your movement when you say, come join us, everything's going to be awful, yay. No one wants to join that movement. So I think as sustainability educators, we have to emphasize what is positive about the changes in our lifestyle that we're going to have to make. Less pollution is positive. Eating less red meat is positive for our health. Having more public transportation is positive for congestion on our roadways and for air pollution. So there's a lot of positives that we do not emphasize. And if we continue to say that sustainability is all about sacrifice, nobody wants to sign up for that.
I think we can do better regarding to positive framing of these things and point to the benefits and the win-win situations sometimes. Okay, we pointed out a lot of these misconceptions, so they are there. What to do about them? As a co-author of the Debunking Handbook, what key principles can mythbusters and educators apply from this resource to combat misinformation or misunderstandings about sustainability education? What works in your opinion and what doesn't work?
Yeah, so we know, and I just mentioned our meta-analysis, that refutations work. So our meta-analysis will be coming out soon, and you can see that work. We know that debunking works when it's done the right way. There's a lot of work now on pre-bunking and inoculation theory, and we're seeing that that's an effective strategy as well. I think Sander van der Linden's work,
Yeah.
summarized in his book Foolproof, shows a lot of the work in that area that is effective. Lisa Fazio from Vanderbilt has a massive study coming out that compares, I think, 6 or 8 different strategies. And it turns out that most of them are very effective, pretty good. So in some sense, it almost doesn't matter which one you use as long as you use one.
Okay.
But there are multiple ones in her upcoming study, which hopefully will be published soon, and that are reviewed in that Eckert et al. Article about comparing different myth busting and misconception busting strategies. So there's a number of them. They are effective. They should be employed. What doesn't work? Telling everybody who doesn't understand something that they're stupid. That really doesn't work. People don't come over to your point of view right after you tell them they're stupid. That totally doesn't work. Don't tell people they're wrong and then leave it at that. Also doesn't work. You can say some people think this, but it turns out that's not true, and here's why. That's more effective than saying you're wrong. Nobody
So
really
giving them an alternative, scientifically sound mental model.
Right, and the you're wrong doesn't work, because you don't want to attacking people's character doesn't make them want to come join your point of view.
Absolutely.
So I think one other thing that works is more listening. So one of the things that is very effective is when someone has a misunderstanding, you should listen to what their concern is. Because I'll give you an example. My niece was hesitant when the coronavirus vaccine came out to get the vaccine because she had heard from a Facebook friend that it caused infertility. She's a young woman. She wants to have children. So obviously that's a legitimate concern. It wasn't scientifically accurate, but the concern is legitimate. And so understanding people's legitimate concerns and then addressing them by saying, I have not heard that that's true. So maybe you should check with your doctor before you get the vaccine and see what your doctor says. And of course, the doctor told her that wasn't true. She got vaccinated, and then she encouraged her Facebook friend to also get vaccinated. So happy ending to that story. But the point of that story is just running around telling people they're wrong or calling them stupid doesn't work. Listening and trying to address their sometimes very legitimate concerns is much more effective.
How can intentional conceptual change? I stumbled over that term in a work of yours and Paul Pintridge from 2003. How can intentional conceptual change be used to effectively tackle misunderstandings about sustainability education?
Well, what that's about is it's about being reflective about our own knowledge and questioning our own knowledge and being willing to change your thinking. That is the most important thing that any of us can do in this rapidly changing situation we're in right now. So a good example is right now, while the climate models have been pretty accurate and pretty good, there's some things going on right now that the climate models didn't predict, and unfortunately probably under predicted. And climate scientists are scrambling to figure out what happened. So being open to adjusting our understanding as new information comes about and being intentional about that, weighing evidence and being open to changing our mind is the most important thing we can do in regards to understanding science, because science obviously is always changing. So we have to be open to revising our own understandings.
Earlier, we also stated that institutional and social cultural forces also serve to perpetuate myths, informal, non-formal, and informal learning environments. That sounds very discouraging and reminds me of Don Quixote's battle against windmills. Do mythbusters really have a chance? Why should they fight?
Well, they do. I mean, if you look at Naomi Oreskes' work on manufactured doubt, she explains the playbook that industries have used, like the tobacco industry, to deny the harmful health impacts of smoking. And that playbook has been used over and over again against education in evolution, against education in climate change, and certainly against sustainability. It's a playbook they use it. And obviously, that is something to be aware of, that, there are nefarious sources who are using our own psychology against us to convince us that things are not where they are.
So to manipulate us in a way. I'd like to do, before we come to the end, a quick round on statements. I'll present you a few statements and I would like you to indicate whether you see them as myths, facts, or something in between. And if you want to, a brief explanation of your reasoning. Statement 1 would be conceptual change is mainly about correcting misinformation with the right facts.
No, it's not how I would describe it. I would say conceptual change is about changing our thinking about fundamental concepts.
Statement 2 would be sustainability education is a hype or a passing fad.
No, I don't believe that.
Statement 3, the higher educated people are, the more they act and think sustainably.
Oh, that's not true, sadly.
Statement 4, sustainability education is too demanding.
No, I don't believe that.
Statement 5, direct instruction is ineffective or even counterproductive when it comes to sustainability education.
No, there's always a role for direct instruction in education, as long as it's only part of what we're doing.
I see. Thanks a lot for your quick answers to those questions. I would love to go more into the detail regarding your reasoning behind those, but I don't think that we have time for it. When we come to the future of educational myth research, what are the most pressing questions or areas of research that need to be addressed to further understand and combat these myths in and about sustainability education?
How to effectively confront misinformation shared on social media.
Could you recommend, apart from the sources you already mentioned, literature, resources, or individuals that are interesting in that field that we have talked about?
Yeah, I would recommend Sam Weinberg's new book, Verified.
Okay.
Plus our own book on science denial. I think we talk about some of those issues in there.
I can also link it down in the show notes of the episode.
Sander van der Linden's book, Foolproof. I would recommend that.
Thanks a lot. Your insights today have been incredibly enlightening. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I'm delighted that we got this opportunity to chat.
Before we conclude, is there anything you'd like to add or emphasize?
No, I'm just thankful that you're doing this work. It's important, and I hope you succeed in pulling together a resource like a wiki. That's a great idea.
Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gale. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for your interest in the Sustainability Education podcast. Did you find the insights helpful? Do you have any questions, comments, or objections? Then feel free to get in touch and share this episode with others. This podcast is produced by the Institute of Business Education and Educational Management at the University of St. Gallen. Thank you for listening and hear you in the next episode. Bye bye.